Mammal Society conducted the red listing assessment for mammals in Britain and also individually for each of the nations in Britain. So there's a Scottish one. So if you go on the Mammal Society website, you can find it. Actually, and it looks specifically at mammals in Scotland. So if you just search Mammal Society Red List Scotland, and it'll come up. And there they found just under 50% of species were in the categories that were either near threatened or worse, so near threatened, vulnerable, endangered, critically endangered, or data deficient. There's but I worked with a lot of wildcats in the past. In the course of that work, I met somebody called Elspeth Sterling, now what she does is she neuters feral cats, and feral cats are a threat to wildcats, and she's been taking it under as a task that she's going to do. She spent years doing it actually, and she's single-handedly by herself neutered thousands of feral cats, which I think is extraordinary actually. So over the years that she's been working, it's more than anybody else, any other single person in Scotland, as far as I'm aware, has done. So that's probably an unusual thing. That's going the extra mile. Quite a lot of the species have a problem, or potentially have a problem. Often it's to do with habitat loss in some form, so change in land use, for example, or change in like the quality of habitat, the quality of our rivers, for example. Habitat loss might also include loss of prey. So changes in habitat are probably a key driver for a lot of species, but you can have other factors as well. So you can have, for example, persecution, and that can still be ongoing, or for some protected species, it's historic persecution that's caused the issue in the first place, and the species hasn't recovered from that yet, and that can also lead to other issues. So I mentioned with wildcats, for example, hybridization is a risk factor. So that's hybridizing with domestic cats, and wildcats aren't the only species that's got that problem in Scotland. So we've also got polecat, which is related very closely to the ferret, which is a domestic animal, and they're hybridizing too. So most of the polecats in Scotland are in fact hybrids with ferrets. So that's a similar case as we find with wildcats. So you've got habitat loss, you've got persecution, hybridization, disease can play a role. We highlighted in that IUCN Red List that rabbits, though not a native species, they're part of our ecosystem these days, and they've seen dramatic declines, and that's generally to do with disease outbreaks. So initially it was myxomatosis, and more recently it's rabbit hemorrhagic fever as well. So these are the sort of range of factors that can play a role in species declines. It's ecosystems are complex, and it's not often readily apparent what impacts loss of species or additions of species can have until it happens. But generally, the more species an ecosystem has, the more stability it has. So if you lose, for example, if you were to lose one of the prey species like rabbit or like water vole from an ecosystem, then that's one less prey species for predators to prey on, and that can, for example, mean that there's more fluctuations in their prey availability because they can't switch between different prey species as populations change, because most populations naturally vary. So you can get instability in the ecosystem because then you lose a predator, or the predator declines. Or if you lose a predator, you can have it can affect the prey species. So you might see changes in prey species, which might then influence the habitat itself, because too many herbivores of a species might, for example, lead to overgrazing in some areas. So you've got all these interlinked effects that can cascade up or down the system. So generally, a complete ecosystem with more species is more stable and less likely to be disrupted by loss of other individual elements of an ecosystem or changes from the external environments. We're going through this massive climate change at the minute, and certain species will be adapting well to that changing climate, and certain species won't adapt as well. And if you've got fewer species in your environment, in your ecosystem, then there's more likely there's going to be a problem down the road because there's a loss of some key elements of the ecosystem. The lynx would prey on one of the main prey species is roe deer. Roe deer are one of these species that impacts forest regeneration, which, as I was just talking to you about, impacts of too many, of an imbalanced ecosystem. So too many roe deer they'll browse on young tree saplings, for example, and then the forest doesn't regenerate. And of course, forest is something that, apart from being great for forest species, is also really important for our our commitment to reducing climate change, because growing forests, of course, trap carbon. So lynx. So and as a result, we have to roe management currently conducted in Britain generally is through humans going out and shooting these animals. But usually, or often, there's not enough animals are shot, so there's too many roe deer. So lynx is a predator that would prey on roe deer, and it would also probably change their behaviour. So the subtle effect it might have is they might change roe deer behaviour, so they're maybe spending less time in the forest, because that's where the lynx are hiding. And so it would reduce both the population of roe deer, but also probably the impact they have on the forest generally as well. But lynx also are known to prey on other animals, including domestic animals like sheep, for example. And there's a lot of debate about how many sheep a lynx might take. Most people argue that it's a very minor component of their diet, and mostly if there's enough roe deer, they'll be feeding on the roe deer and they'll ignore the sheep. Of course, there's farmers who would be justifiably, I guess, concerned about introducing a large predator in the environment, and if they would then to lose their sheep that they've invested time and effort in growing a flock, to then have loss of those sheep from predation by this reintroduced species of predator. It's quite difficult sometimes knowing where you can make an impact. So, potentially, for example, but watching, paying attention to the food you buy might have might benefit some species. So if you're buying organic food that might improve habitat for pollinators, that might go on to be prey for bat species, for example, might be a way of helping some species. Making sure your pet cat's neutered is something that we always talk about when we talk about wildcat conservation. So if you're a pet owner, making sure you have your cats neutered, and actually being aware as well of the impacts your pets have. So you've got cats, and they're obviously going out of the house and preying on mammals. But actually, if you're out dog walking, your dog is also having an impact on the local wildlife, because dogs disturb certain, even small mammals around, paths, for example, they can disturb them. So just being aware of the impacts you have as an individual on your environment is quite important. And supporting organisations that act to conserve land and mammals. A lot of it goes back down to our earlier point about ecosystems. An intact ecosystem is not just important for its own sake, but actually it's the underpinning of our own society and civilization. Is a healthy ecosystem. We lost so many already. I think the reason that we've got a longer history of we screwed up earlier, shall we say? So we lost some of our species earlier, and it made us sit up and think, well, what's happening to all these species that we're losing? And what's happening to the other species? Having lost these species, what's happening to the rest of them? And so we started paying more attention to conservation.